Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mighty Chen, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am super excited because we're continuing the reading of Stars of Chaos, Volume 4, also known as Sha Polang by Priest. Unfortunately, today we're only covering 2 chapters. That's going to be 98 and 99, but I hope you enjoy. Chapter 98, Revolution. Guyuan's hand felt its way up Changgung's waist, enough to be teasing, but not overly aggressive. The warmth of his palm seeped through the layer of cloth between them, a faint sensation against Changgung's side, as if he were lying next to a gentle flame. Changgung had missed him too much. He had longed for this intimacy ever since their brief stay in the Jiangbei garrison, but one thing after another had kept them apart. Whatever grand ambitions he held in his heart, Changgung's body was still that of a man in his early 20s. It had been different before he had gotten his first taste. But to be cut off by Miss Chun when he had just had his fill was unbearable. If not for this too busy workload that prevented him from relaxing fully, he would have long gone mad with want. He had no resistance to this teasing. One light touch from Gu Yuan left half his body tingling. Changgung gulped down a few rapid breaths, his ears ringing. Yifu, are you trying to kill me? Your injuries don't hurt anymore? They did hurt, but not in the same way. Most of the time, His Highness Prince Yan's injuries hurt a normal amount. When he was pouting to ask for kisses, they hurt a great deal. Right now, even if his wounds tore open and his blood flowed like a river, he would be as insensible to the pain as a man of steel. They don't? Perfect. Guyuan caught Changgung's hand as it snaked into his clothes, fished it out, and tossed it to the side. In that case, now's the perfect time for you to explain yourself, he said with a smile. Changgung blinked. Guyuan pillowed one hand behind his head and reclined on the bed, his other hand still wandering over Changgung's waist. His tone was mild, but the words were enough to make one break out in cold sweat. Tell me, Guyuan said, precisely what were you thinking when you decided to bravely charge into a bandit's nest with a helpless scholar like Commissioner Xu for company? Zishi. No need to zishi me, Guyuan said blandly. You can keep saying Yifu. Changgung laughed uneasily and offered an apologetic kiss. He had recently discovered that Guyuan liked these sorts of clingy kisses. If he pecked him a few times, then stared at him with that beseeching gaze, Guyuan would agree to practically any request. But today, this trick seemed to have lost its efficacy. Guyuan arched one brow. You needn't be so polite. My injuries don't hurt. Prince Yan, who usually had a whole deck of cards up his sleeve, was finally out of tricks. He had no choice but to properly answer the question. I never thought they would actually rebel. Guyuan flashed Changgung an indulgent smile and caressed his cheek with the back of his hand before continuing his merciless interrogation. Bullshit. You definitely considered the possibility. Changgung's throat bobbed. Commissioner Xu and I were on our way to their headquarters. I didn't think they would choose that time. Oh? Guyuan nodded. Then you thought, look, a 1-in-a-million opportunity to seek my own death, and off you went. There was a note of danger in Guyuan's voice. Changgung sensed the conversation was veering in the wrong direction. He immediately wised up and admitted the error of his ways. I was wrong. Guyuan let his hand fall. His face was unreadable, peach blossom eyes half-lidded. Changgung couldn't tell what he was thinking, and he unconsciously tensed. But after the longest time, Guyuan didn't unleash any of his anger. He only asked out of the blue. Was it because I asked you when we could resettle the refugees and recover Jiangnan? Did I pressure you? Aw. When he spoke, a faint crease appeared between his brows, and an almost desolate look came into his eyes. Changgung had seen him with such an expression only once before, on that New Year's Eve so many years ago, aboard the red-headed kite. At the time, this same quiet, lonely chill had passed over Guyuan's face as he honored thousands of deceased souls with 3 cups of wine. Then, it had seemed as if, even with every lantern in the capital lit as bright as day, nothing could illuminate his stark profile. On the verge of panic, Changgung began to stumble over his words. Zishi. When Guyuan was younger, he had disliked opening up to others about his feelings. He felt that scrawling all of one's happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy across one's face was like peeling off one's clothes and showing people the bare skin beneath. It was indecent, first of all, and who would want to see it? This preference had nothing to do with his inborn personality, but was purely something endowed by his upbringing. Normally, everyone sat together gnawing on hunks of meat and guzzling their wine in great gulps, with little difference between them. It was only when people were roaring drunk that such natural differences became apparent. Some would cry and wail, while others would, at most, tap their chopsticks and break into song. Though the timing wasn't quite right, the words were rolling back and forth on the tip of Guyuan's tongue, bobbing up and down. When he spoke, it was tentative, as though testing the waters. On the way here from the capital, Chang'eng was an expert at reading others. He instantly sensed what Guyun was about to say. His pupils contracted, and he stared at Guyun in both panic and expectation. Guyun had likely never spoken words so difficult in his entire life. He nearly lost his courage. Holding his breath, Chang'eng prompted, "On the way here, you what?" "I was scared to death." Chang'eng stared blankly. When the Jiangnan Navy had been wiped out, when the Black Iron Battalion lost over half its number, when Li Feng summoned Guyun from the imperial dungeons, had Guyun ever said he was scared to death? Guyun seemed eternally composed. He never panicked, and if he did, he was probably faking it. His strength was unnatural, which in turn made others uneasy, as if one day he would up and collapse like the capital's 9 gates. These first few words seemed to open a long-sealed floodgate. The rest came in a rush. "If something really happened to you this time, what would I do?" Listening, Chang'eng hardly dared to breathe. Guyun's voice was low. "Chang'eng, I really don't have the strength to let another person into my heart." Chang'eng was shocked. This man had the strength to bring order to the Northwest, the strength to spend sleepless nights locked in debate with old General Zhong over the organization of the Jiangbei Navy. If he perished before the nation recovered stability, he could never rest in peace. The one thing he didn't have the strength to do was love another person. These past years, aside from Shen Yi, a friend with whom he'd braved mortal peril on countless occasions, Guyuan had only a large and empty marquis estate. The scant bits of sincere personal affection he had managed to wring out were all spent on the youth the late emperor had entrusted to him years ago. In the course of the endless exchange of favors that characterized the political sphere, officials often heaped praise on each other, and when they praised Marshal Gu, it was almost always in words that celebrated his selflessness and working to exhaust for the good of the nation. But in actual fact, Guyuan wasn't purely selfless, with no other desire than to work for the greater good. It was just that, when it came down to it, he didn't have many selfish attachments to prioritize. Guyuan hadn't felt this loneliness quite so deeply when he was young. He was the Marquis of Order with the 3 divisions of the Black Iron Battalion under his command. Back then, even if he was bursting with grievance and indignation, downing a jug of wine would allow him to forget his troubles and crawl out of bed the next morning in high spirits as always. But as the years weighed on him, so too did his concerns grow heavier. Before he had realized it, the carefree disposition of his youth had been worn down to a nub. In recent days, he found himself tiring easily, and when he was fatigued in body, he also felt dejected in spirit as well. If not for the oft meticulous, oft unbalanced Prince Yan acting as the target of his worries, there would really be no meaning to his life. The fatigue and despondence on Guyuan's face passed quickly, tucked away in the blink of an eye. He carefully settled Chang'eng on the bed, pulled over a thin blanket to drape across Chang'eng's body, and sighed. "Lie down. You can't even stand up straight, and you're still thinking about that stuff. Can't you be serious for a single moment?" Chang'eng grabbed hold of Guyuan's hand. Guyuan's hands were never warm. They always felt as if he'd just been holding a windslasher, dry, stiff, and cold. "Zishi, lie with me for a while," he pleaded. Guyuan wordlessly removed his outer robe and lay down beside him. He wrapped his arms around Chang'eng over the blanket. Before long, he'd fallen asleep. Only then did Chang'e quietly open his eyes. Every hair on his body was standing on end with the desire to drag this person over and ravish him. But Chang'e couldn't bear to shatter the warm and peaceful atmosphere. He stayed stock still as the flames of desire baked him alive, joyful in his suffering. It had been almost 11 years since the day Gu Yun found him near Yanhui town. Gu Yun had spent most of those at the border and on the battlefield. They were apart more often than they were together, but Gu Yun had never left his heart for a single day. Sometimes Chang'e didn't know how he ought to go about loving him. He felt as if he could never repay what Gu Yun had given him, even if he spent every day of the rest of his life trying. All of a sudden, he realized perhaps it wasn't that Gu Yun was the one good thing in his life worth looking forward to. Instead, it was as if everything he had suffered since birth was all to gather enough good fortune to meet this person. At this thought, years of resentment miraculously melted away. With Prince Yan injured and out of commission in Jiangbei, it was up to Xu Ling to resolve all matters, large and small, related to this case. Commissioner Xu was a beast of a man who bent to neither flattery nor intimidation, and he had also managed to dig up Du-Long, the god of wealth's own son, from who knows where. Young Master Du was a man of few words, but he was difficult to fool and nearly impossible to bribe. His family was so wealthy, even the emperor owed them a few debts. No one dared offer what trifling benefits they could scourge up to this man. At the end of the 9th month, with all aid of Prince Yan's council and the concerted efforts of the Jiangbei garrison, Xu Ling put a definitive end to the mob rebellion and resettled the local refugees. Yao Zhen stepped in as acting governor of Liangjiang, and Xu Ling returned to the capital to report on the completion of his mission, bringing Prince Yan's memorial with him. Thus, the curtain fell on a major case that had shaken the nation. As for Prince Yan himself, he dawdled, taking his time convalescing while advancing toward the capital at a leisurely crawl. Though he had yet to show his face, his groundbreaking canal corridor plans had already put down roots. His memorial was held in the palace for only 2 days before passing in a single grand assembly with major support from the Grand Council and unusual silence from the Imperial Censorate and Department of Supervision. The noble families were occupied putting their own houses in order and had neither time nor energy to spare for outside affairs. Fang Qin, too, was lying low. The long-gone emperor approved the memorial the very same day. The Grand Council, which had long expected this decision, moved with unbelievable efficiency. They produced a comprehensive plan within 2 days. One couldn't help but suspect they'd been prepared. Within a month, the Grand Council had formed an independent canal commission district from the 6 ministries. The Canal Commission held plenary authority to represent the court in dealings with Du Wanquan and members of his Chamber of Commerce. In one stroke, the god of wealth transformed from an independent man of business into a proper imperial merchant. The resources he had quietly readied flowed into the factory sites in an endless stream. For a full month, the entire court worked tirelessly until a whole horde of civil officials who had only ever idled at their desks collapsed from exhaustion. The entirety of Great Liang was ablaze, as if striving to make up for 2 reigns overrun with sinecures all at once. In the end, they managed to gather all the refugees of the Liangjiang region beneath rudimentary factory shacks before midwinter. It was then that Prince Yan finally arrived in the capital. Chapter 99. Turmoil. Although Gu Yun had made a quick round trip between the capital and Jiangbei already, many things remained for him to do on the front lines. It was the perfect excuse for Chang'e to take some time to recover, so the two only started heading back after Chang'e had regained his usual mobility, making their way slowly toward the capital. On the journey, they came across a busy scene along the canal banks. A factory in the middle of construction was never a pretty sight. Dust swirled through the air, and every craftsman, laborer, civil official, and imperial merchant deployed to oversee the process was coated in a layer of grime. Yet it seemed, overall, to be an orderly process. The workers were provided 2 meals a day, and at noon, a bunch of young and sturdy refugees who had so recently laid down the weapons they had raised in rebellion fished coarse, multi-grain buns from an iron cart. Guyuan had disguised himself in commoner's clothing to survey the site. The buns, made with good flour, were a solid weight in the hand and substantial when broken open. They were nothing compared to the banquets of delicacies served on jade plates in Kite's Flight Pavilion of days past. Such buns didn't even count as plain tea and simple fare. But it was still a comfort to see a group of men fresh off their shifts gathered with rations in hand, dipping them into a jar of sauce a 4 men had brought from home to share in a meal. They approached the capital with Guyun on horseback following Changgung's carriage. When their conversation reached the topic of the factories, Changgong said with a smile, "Many of the craftsmen were invited from other regions to serve as foremen and lead the construction work. But Master Du recruited most of the remaining laborers from the refugees. Once construction's completed, they'll be able to stay at whichever factory they hauled bricks to build and will always have work. I hear Master Du requested an imperial edict from the Canal Commission to guarantee it. Unless the workers themselves want to leave, the factories won't drive anyone away. They'll have a place for a lifetime." No one wished to put down roots more than those wandering and destitute. Since the refugees were tasked with building their new homes themselves, they did the work eagerly and well, and few slacked on the job. Du Wanquan merely needed to provide meals. In exchange, he would save a great deal on labor and attract a flock of old ladies calling him Philanthropist Du and offering prayers to him along with the Buddha while he was at it. It was a brilliant maneuver by the god of wealth. Good, Guyuan thought for a moment. It's a bit like the arrangement for military families, except without reduced rent for their dependents, but civilians don't match soldiers in discipline. What if someone shirks their work or breaks the law? The Grand Council enacted a law, Changgong said. I gave Jiang Hanshi instructions before I left, and it's been decreed alongside the imperial edict. There are 13 articles in total, and each contains detailed rules and regulations. Specially designated criers explain the law every evening after their shift ends. If there is sufficient evidence that a laborer has committed a crime, the local branch of the Canal Commission has the authority to expel that offender. Or are you worried about what would happen if officials and merchants colluded to take advantage of the laborers? Surprised, Guyuan broke into laughter. What? You have a plan for that too? We do, Changgong said. If more than half of the veterans who have worked in the factory for over 10 years are willing to speak up on behalf of the offender, that person can stay. In addition, the accused can report the incident to a higher administrative level within the Canal Commission. But even with all these contingencies, problems will crop up over time. We'll just have to slowly amend the system as necessary. There's no sense expecting to get everything right on the first try. Guyuan couldn't resist the urge to ask, "How long have you been planning this?" "I didn't come up with it alone," Changgong said with a smile. "I had a vague idea when I first began speaking with Master Du, and we've been laying the groundwork, having endless discussions and making endless adjustments the whole time. We spent over a year polishing it to this point. Master Du and his people have spent their lives traveling the world and have even visited the Far West multiple times. They have vast amounts of experience and are quick to adapt, but they lacked an inroad. As long as I build that road, they can hold up the rafters." Scholars had their pedantic ways and lofty ideals, while merchants had their cunning and business finesse. Neither were inherently good nor evil. It all depended how those in high positions directed their efforts. Oh, right, Zishi. Master Du said the Far Westerners have this giant carriage of tremendous length. Changgong stuck his head out the window as excitement crept into his voice. It rides on iron rails and runs fast as the wind, but is completely different from the great condor and giant kites. It can pull many more carriages behind it. Wouldn't that allow you to transport as much cargo as you wanted? It's much better than using the canal, but it does require lots of land, and it'd be difficult to plan for long routes. While we're expropriating land to construct factories, it's a perfect opportunity to set aside the land needed for it. To tell you the truth, I've really got to hand it to Yangdu faction for their eagerness in buying up properties. They've saved me a lot of trouble. Master Du plans to start in the Canal region and build one as proof of concept. With the front line in Jiangnan as at a stalemate, it's difficult to transport all the provisions, violet gold, and engines back and forth from the capital. If we could get it constructed one day. Guyuan didn't have many opinions on the national economy or the livelihoods of the people, but he was extremely sensitive to matters of national defense and military affairs. He took Changang's meaning as soon as he spoke. Give me the details. Chang'ang paused and beckoned Guyuan close, as if he planned to whisper into his ear. Guyuan urged his horse forward, drawing level with the window, and leaned over. What? Are there things you can't reveal yet? It's not that I can't say it, but... Chang'ang hesitated. Guyuan was bemused. He had just begun to wonder what reason there was for such secrecy when Chang'ang leaned out of the carriage and stole a kiss. Guyuan was at a loss for words. Chang'ang peered around and confirmed that they were blocked by the carriage. No one was looking their way. He quietly continued, "Let me do it again tonight, and I'll show you the schematics." Tugging on his horse's reins, Guyuan leaned away. "How many times have I let you do it already? All you know is how to act spoiled because of your injuries and play shameless tricks. No way." Chang'ang was a perfect specimen, but for one thing. He was a control freak, especially when it came to Guyuan. If he could, he'd be happy to dress and feed him as well. He usually kept himself in check to avoid making Guyuan uncomfortable. But he had few such reservations in bed. "Yifu," Chang'ang whispered, "if I'm not servicing you well, I can put more effort into my studies. Son, you needn't go to such lengths." They had by now passed the northern camp, so Guyuan wasn't wearing his armor. Instead, he had donned a long robe in civilian style, with sleeves wider than the waist. Chang'ang snatched the corner of his sleeve with ease and mutely swung it back and forth. In one of the small towns they passed through on their way, they had seen a 3 or 4-year-old child crying and tugging on his parents' sleeve, throwing a tantrum over a piece of candy. Ever since, who knew what screw had come loose in Chang'ang's head, but he copied the move in its entirety and even seemed to be developing it into something all his own. There was not a single sleeve on which he could tug as a child. Now, even though he had grown enough to hold up the skies unassisted, he seemed to still have some regrets and had decided to make up for them all via Guyuan. Guyuan smiled as goosebumps prickled over his skin. "No means no. Now hands off. Your Highness, have you no shame?" Chang'ang held on tight. The way things were going, it appeared he didn't plan to stop till he had rendered Guyuan a literal cut sleeve in broad daylight. Shen Yi and Jiang Chong had led a welcoming party to greet them outside the city gates. They saw from afar Prince Yan sticking his head out of the carriage to converse with Guyuan as Guyuan allowed his godly battle steed to proceed at a lazy stroll. A faint smile twinkled at the corner of his eyes, but his lips were pressed into a thin line as he intentionally ignored Chang'ang. The first time Prince Yan spoke, Guyuan rapped him across the back of the hand, forcing him to release his sleeve. Prince Yan refused to give up and spoke up again. This time, Guyuan pulled down the curtain of his carriage, as if to put him out of sight, out of mind. When Prince Yan pulled the curtain aside to poke his head out and speak a third time, Guyuan finally broke and began to laugh. He flapped a hand at him, seeming to concede. Watching this exhibition, Jiang Chong was stunned. Shen Yi sighed. "Thank goodness the marshal has no children of his own. He'd have spoiled them into absolute terrors to rival even himself. Just look how incapable he is of saying no 3 times in a row to His Highness. Even if he denies Prince Yan's first 2 requests, he's guaranteed to agree to the third." Jiang Chong hadn't fully recovered from his shock. "I'd always thought, with how little time the Marquis spends in the capital, he and Prince Yan were only godfather and godson in name. They seem to share quite a close relationship." Shen Yi's musings went off the rails as soon as he heard the word relationship. He'd been just bemoaning how Guyuan could never be a stern father, but now his train of thought took a sharp turn. "Gu Zixi has become addled with lust. He's never had a single moment of propriety in his entire life. What in the hell is he doing acting so shamelessly in the middle of the day?" The lust-addled lecher felt his nose begin to itch. When he turned to sneeze, he caught sight of Justice Jiang and Commander Shun observing them with looks, respectively, of "How reassuring to see harmony between generals and ministers," and "You awful influence! Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" written across their two faces. As for Prince Yan, who had recovered his dignified bearing, he was whisked away to the palace before he even had the chance to step down from his carriage. While Shunyi was busy shooting Gu Yuan a series of condemnatory glares, Gu Yuan, who had just agreed to some truly shameful requests, was steeping in regrets. "What are you looking at?" he snapped at Shunyi. Commander Shun, the old pedant, laid into Gu Yuan with all the power in his righteous indignation. "You're really too far out of line sometimes. I'm only pointing out what anyone would say. What did I do? You're acting like a lecher bewitched by a fox spirit." Gu Yuan was speechless. This wrongful accusation was as absurd as warm thunderstorms in winter and driving snow in summer. Yet he couldn't defend himself even with 100 mouths at his disposal. He was sorely tempted to cut ties with this Shun bastard for good. Fortunately, before he could do away with Commander Shun, the man distracted him with business. "I figured you'd be here within a few days, so I didn't send anyone to bring you word. There are 2 urgent matters I need to discuss with you. First, the northern barbarians Jialai Yinghuo sent an envoy." A grim look came over Gu Yuan's face. After the Black Iron Battalion caught their breath and pacified the strife to their west, they had set their sights on the north. In the interim, they had greatly relieved the pressure on Great Liang's forces maintaining defenses along that border. The Black Iron Battalion was Jialai Yinghuo's lifelong nightmare. With the Black Crows watching the passes, the Wolf King of the 18 tribes wouldn't make any rash moves. But the northern border had always been a barren region, and the people there relied on the mercy of the heavens merely to raise some cows and sheep. To fight this war, even Great Liang had emptied its coffers, to say nothing of Jialai Yinghuo, who had always neglected logistics like supplies and production in favor of his all-consuming desire for revenge. It was only natural that as time went on, they would reach the end of their rope. "Peace talks?" Gu Yuan asked. Shunyi nodded. "It hasn't been brought before a grand assembly yet. His Majesty summoned us to discuss their conditions. You know what I'm thinking, don't you?" Gu Yuan's brow jumped. "It's just like that time the old Wolf King increased the violet gold tribute and offered him as a hostage," Shunyi said. "The wording and tone are all too familiar, humble and earnest, and they're offering generous conditions too. Zishi, do you believe they're sincere?" Gu Yuan pondered a moment. His words, when he spoke, came slow. "Not really. The barbarians aren't like the Far Westerners. The Far Westerners are greedy, but the barbarians bear a generations-long grudge, especially Jialai Yinghuo." "What are you thinking?" Shunyi pressed. "Ever since Jialai Yinghuo took command of the 18 tribes, he's done nothing but pursue revenge against the Central Plains." Gu Yuan said, "If they're coming for peace talks now, there are 2 possibilities. Either someone within the 18 tribes has overthrown Jialai, or he's up to no good." Shunyi was hesitant. "We can't exclude the possibility that the 18 tribes really are at the end of their tether. No, it's not yet winter. I don't believe they've fully exhausted their resources already." Gu Yuan sighed. "Listen, Jialai is a mad dog. Mad dogs don't care whether they eat meat or grass. All they want to do is bite." "Right. What did His Majesty say?" "His Majesty..." Shunyi paused, then lowered his voice. "This was the second thing I wanted to tell you. His Majesty is doing poorly." Gu Yuan started in surprise. He switched to holding grand assemblies every 15 days on the 1st and 15th of every month. Anything else that requires discussion is to be brought before a smaller assembly held by the Grand Council before it's passed up to the Western Warm Pavilion for His Majesty's approval. It seems to me His Majesty has less and less tolerance for listening to people squabble in grand assemblies of late. Shunyi said quietly, "And listen, during the Grand Assembly on the 1st of this month, after the Imperial attendant announced the dismissal, His Majesty trod on his own dragon robe when he stood. He would have tumbled straight down from his throne if the Imperial Guard on duty hadn't caught him. But he broke his leg." Shunyi pointed at his own calf. right here. He's still bedbound. I'm guessing that's why he summoned Prince Yan to the palace in such a hurry. Gu Yuan was shocked. You can break a bone just from falling over? That's way too unlucky. The imperial physicians are all afraid to talk. They hemmed and hawed without saying anything. Later, they invited Miss Chun to examine him. She said years of overwork and improper diet have weakened him to the point that his bones would break with just a fall. There are rumors going around that the late emperor suffered the same back in the day. No wonder the imperial physicians were so tight-lipped. Only Miss Chun, who frequently traveled beyond the pass, dared speak the truth. This nation could grind people down to the bone. Shen Yi glanced around. All the officials who had come to welcome Prince Yan had followed Jiang Chong away. Gu Yuan had left his Black Iron Battalion guards in the northern camp, keeping only some personal guards from his estate. Shen Yi lowered his voice further still, whispering at a near inaudible volume. Even the noble consort was implicated in the Liu family scandal. She was stripped of her title outright. It was never openly announced, but she's basically been shunned and sent to the cold palace. The crown prince is still so young, and he can't count on much support from his mother's family. If his majesty really... what do you think he intends, summoning Prince Yan to the palace so urgently? Is he going to entrust his children to him, or... Gu Yuan gave him a look, and Shen Yi's mouth snapped shut. During the capital siege, when the imperial city was on the verge of collapse, Li Feng had intended to abdicate not to the crown prince, but to Prince Yan. Then, the country had been a hair's breadth away from falling into enemy hands. The young crown prince would indeed have been unable to hold a nation up ruled by the house of Li. But now, even if their lost territory in Jiangnan had yet to be recovered, the northern barbarians had already sent a peace envoy. After a few more years of recovery, they would have the strength to fight. Would the emperor still choose to pass the throne to his younger brother instead of his son? Gu Yuan suddenly recalled the incongruous question Li Feng had asked him in the midst of the Imperial Guard's rebellion. Did you know Prince Yan was abused by that barbarian woman as a child? Li Feng wasn't the type to ask Chang'e that sort of thing of his own initiative. It was far more likely the prince had broached the topic himself. What consequences had led to such a conversation? Chang'e and Li Feng were brothers, but they weren't close, and Gu Yuan understood Chang'e. Wolf pup that he was, if he wasn't close with someone, he wouldn't let them so much as stroke his fur. There was no way he would have taken the initiative to reveal his childhood wounds, and certainly not to garner sympathy, unless... Understanding flashed through Gu Yuan's mind as a plausible scenario occurred to him. Prince Yan had come of age years ago. Why had no one made arrangements for the major milestone that was his marriage? Even if Prince Yan's position made it awkward for others to bring it up, it wasn't as if Li Feng would have simply forgotten. That day, there must have been more to Li Feng's inexplicable words. Perhaps he meant to say, Prince Yan is unable to overcome this barrier in his heart and unwilling to take a wife and have children. If Prince Yan had no heirs, then no matter what, no one could threaten the young crown prince's position. Thus, if anything should happen to Li Feng, he could perhaps entrust the heavy responsibility of caring for his children to Chang'e. What was more, Li Feng had always encouraged the young crown prince to spend time with Gu Yuan. On the one hand, it was a way to improve his relationship with Gu Yuan, but on the other, he must also have been seeking to secure his son's future. These people and their plots. Do you think there's any chance His Majesty will pass the throne to Prince Yan? Shen Yi asked. Shush, don't speak of that again, Gu Yuan said. Don't get involved. Remember where our duty lies. Shen Yi was quick to agree, but after a moment he continued. Actually, there was another thing I wanted to ask. It's a personal matter. Gu Yuan looked at Shen Yi in surprise. What is it? Shen Yi squirmed in embarrassment. Are you very familiar with Miss Chun? Oh my god! Okay. Okay, that's the end of chapters 90 and 99 and 100. And oh my gosh, let's just go ahead and start with that final sentence. Is my prediction gonna come true? Does Shen Yi have feelings for Miss Chun? Chun Ching Shu? That would be so cool. That would be nice. I would like for Shen Yi to have someone because I really, really like his character. Anyway, I can't wait to read what's next so I can see because And you know what? Since I started with the last thing, I'm just going to continue going backwards. So, the other thing I want to talk about is, my gosh, I love Changung because I love how he was able to get Gu Yun to show affection in public, you know? I know that Gu Yun cares a lot about his image and everything. And, at certain times throughout the series, at least for sure in the last book, he didn't really want people knowing that he was a duanshu, which is a cut sleeve. And so it's just really nice to see him coming out of his shell for Chang'e, and for himself, because no one should have to hide who they are, afraid of what others may think or how they may judge or look at you and everything. So it was just so nice to see them acting publicly so sweet with each other. Then going back again in chapter 99, I am just so happy that Chang'e's plans have come to fruition. Essentially, he went through this elaborate thing ever since he left Great Liang to go to Jiangbei to figure out what was going on with the refugees. And although he came across troubles, it was really nice that everything he planned just worked out. Of course, some bumps in the road, but it's just one of those things where I like when things work out for good people. And at the end of the day, there were so many others, these refugees who were living a horrible life, who were in horrible conditions. And what he wanted to do was to get them to a place where they could live. Literally, they were building their own homes, but and not starve to death. And that's very admirable. He put so much into place and faced so much, even, treason was put in his name, even though he wasn't the treasonous one, just to get this goal accomplished. And so that just makes me really happy, you guys. And then in chapter 98, I loved even no matter how short it was, because it doesn't matter how long it is, I love that Gu Yun was able to be vulnerable with Chang'e for a moment, when they finally reunited and he was like, yo, I was scared to death. I didn't think I'd see you again, and I can't afford to give my heart to someone else. I was just like, oh my gosh, Gu Yun, yes, you do it, sir, you do it, sir. So, yeah. These 3 chapters were really good. Now let's go to the next because I need to know what happens, or what's this thing with Shanyi and Chen Qingxu. Oh my god. Okay. Bye-bye. 我爱你们.